What the hell? I just got my coffee. Subscribe if you're new, like if you want, Discord below. Let's do this. Let's start at the top with the balanced Dataslate itself. The core rules still persist as is from the autumn 2023 Dataslate. Not much to go over here, which moves us over to the faction rules. The Adeptus Sororitas finally have an entry adjusting the Triumph of St. Catherine's Ebon Chalice ability. It allows for 2 acts of faith instead of 1. From what I understand from Sororitas players, this is a nerf from what I've been told used to be unlimited acts of faith. Seems reasonable. The Adeptus Custodes were given a return to their durability from the opening of 10th by adding devastating wounds to the list of what triggers the 4+ Feel No Pain. I can hear them cheering uncontrollably from here. It pains me. The Aldari gained a slew of adjustments this time around. Their fate dice are reduced to 6, helpful, but full dice control always feels like a little bit of an issue. Fate's Messenger only assists the bearer of the ability. Phantasm has a movement restriction for a d6 instead of 7 inches. Feels more in line with many position-changing units. Eldrad's ability allows for 9 total fate dice, just a slight word adjustment. And the Tournament Dominant Night Spinners had its movement debuff changed to a flat 2-inch reduction. The Incarn's hit and fade potential has been heavily adjusted as its Inevitable Death ability can only occur in the Aldari's player turn. No more Incarn in a box during the enemy turn. And lastly, Wraithguard can no longer pick a different target after being shot at, a decent limit for such a strong unit. The Astra Munitorum had some refinement to their voice of command army rule, specifying officers with the ability as units that can set orders as well as expanding when this happens, it seems. Orders are given in command phase as well as after being set up on the field or disembarking from a transport. A decent change for this ability. Blood Angels had their strength and attack upgrade for the detachment rule increased, helpful with certain weapons when considering the roll gating against certain vehicles and units. The Chaos Demons, not gonna lie, I know demon-specific players have been looking forward to some good changes. This is not the shift for you. And this nerf, as far as I can see, feels very poorly timed for me. I pieced together a list of demons as an ally brick to apply to lists I crafted for my Thousand Suns and my Chaos Knights, just for fun. That brick is no longer viable. Now if you take allies, you must take an equivalent amount of battle line or more than non-battle line units. My Changeling, Lord of Change, Flamers, and Exalted Flamer combo is no longer valid. Blue Horror Squads ordered. I see what you're doing, Games Workshop. Chaos Space Marines had a handful of shifts. Units must have the same mark as their transport. Dark Obscuration had the pseudo lone op range changed. Profane Zeal focused its target on Chaos Undivided and set it to rerolling wound rolls. Accursed Cultists had their OC shifted for Mutants and Torments to 1. The Death Guard, after receiving a very good buff, just picked up what I believe is a clarification, kind of. The Biologist clarifies that it can use the free grenade ploy after the ploy is used regularly, just upping the grenade spam for the most part. The Drakari had their power from Pain Army rule increase the armor penetration of melee by 1, as well as allowing Archons to lead Incubi, which seems like it should have always been that way, but sure. The Grey Knight Nemesis Dread Knight has some weapon stat adjustments, gaining Ignore Cover on the Heavy Psi Cannon, some other adjustments to AP and weapon skill. Fun stuff overall. The Imperial Knight had their Lay Low the Tyrant oath changed to rerolling 1 hit and 1 wound for each time a model shoots or fights. I've been to the subreddit. People still want Bondsman to be rolled back. The Space Wolves had some minor adjustments across a lot of sections for their detachment rules, mostly applied to limiting timeframes down to only 1 turn to achieve saga goals. They had a bunch of other changes though, we'll go over that in a little bit. The World Eaters had their glaive rules changed, no one-tapping knights with a Master of Executions anymore, it seems. Favored of Khorne can only be used once per battle, and the Demon Prince's aura has been adjusted. I believe it used to apply a flat 4+ invulnerable within 6 inches, now it's a 5+ that becomes a 4+ if the unit already had an invulnerable. The data slate itself is one layer of the overall changes that occurred in this massive shift that dropped. My Thousand Suns, Chaos Knights, and Genestealer cults will all persist without the excitement of new toys, I suppose. My demon allies, though, very saddening. But with my recent pickups, I'm almost done my Mono Tzeentch demon list. So there's that. With rules changes comes points changes. Scrolling through, many of the factions had some minor ups and downs. Adeptus Sororitas, Adeptus Custodes, Aldari, Astra Militarum. Many of them had some focused buffs and nerfs. Some surprises come in the form of teams that were limited in their shifts, like the Astra Militarum. The big odd one for me is the Necrons. There are many local players for this team who were bracing for changes as the space undead were tearing their way through tournaments. Nothing. Interesting. Some of the big multi-shifts come from factions like the Chaos Demons, with some spread of reductions that seem to hope to serve as a band-aid to the struggling faction. Chaos Knights as well, lots of reductions, even among the Cerastus. 55 points less for the underpowered Abominant. Don't know how much this is going to help, as the limited power change with this team is further negated by the new problem of Chaos Demon allies. The struggle is real. Chaos Space Marines took some points nerfs. I remember seeing a handful of Forge Fiends at LVO, so almost expected the points increase. Dark Angels with drops almost everywhere, but this is for the index. Keep that in mind. The Codex will hit shelves soon, so there may be a new Munitorum. It's all kind of confusing. Death Guard with some increases and decreases. Sad to see the core Plague Marines go back up, but they did get some nice reductions with things like Typhus. The Drakari, however, seem to be fast-tracked towards some form of an overall fix with their changes to the rules alongside their points reductions, as well as a new detachment, which we'll take a look at in a minute. Big for my buddy with his triple Tantalus concept. Gene Stealer cults, nothing. Just waiting on that codex, I suppose. Imperial Knights had similar points reductions as their Chaos opposition, but most still point to weak rules as the real issue. Leagues of Votann saw some increases. Tau took a big hit in their Crisis battle suits, 200 for each 3 you take. Brutal. Orcs, Space Marines, Nids, World Eaters, all with a fairly roller coaster amount of ups and downs. All of these points changes come from collections of information from testers and tournament info. This usually translates to figuring out the abused units and increasing their points while reducing underused units, to try to provide reason to want to take them. Watching lists of 8-bound World Eaters tear through enemy teams kind of set up their adjustment. At the end of the day, points changes have always been odd. Adjustments like these tend to not always work out as intended, so we'll have to keep a close eye on lists and tournament results going forward. See which units rise to the top with their ability to fill roles all teams need. Genuinely surprising, though, to see the Thousand Suns, Necrons, and a handful of other teams see no big changes, despite either doing very well or doing very poorly. Many will say that the changes that occur around these teams will be the balance for them as well, but we'll see. The rules commentary had some adjustments and refinements added to the list. Clarifications on when units are considered to have moved for the purpose of stratagems when transports are used, measuring from transport halls for unit placement, objective control clarifications. I will leave a link to the QA as well as the other files we've gone over in the description below, but I wanted to touch on a couple QA rules that stood out to me. First up, Hazardous. The ways in which Hazardous worked seemed to be up for debate in some instances based on raw wording. All of this wall of red text you see is what was needed to answer the call of how does this work really? Key things here is that when declaring shooting, you must declare whether hazardous weapons will be used before rolling, as even if the enemy dies before using them, they must still be rolled for. Reasonable. An interesting clarification in some ways is that if a character in a squad with hazardous weapons uses the profile for it, but none of the other models in the unit used the hazardous profile, they can still be targeted to take the effect of the failed roll. A good way to keep characters alive. It also further clarifies that if multiple tests are failed, you can't finagle how the damage is spread, even stating that if mortal wounds, which occur to characters, would happen in excess of that character's life, they would spill over to the squad in sequence of all hazardous weapon wielders and then the rest of the unit. A 1 health character taking the hazardous roll could account for 2 more dead models in a unit filled with single health fodder, a slight increase in the brutality potential. The big one for me has been a question on my mind ever since taking up the Gene Stealer Cult Cup. Do dynamite wielders in trucks lose their one-shot weapons on use with the firing deck, or do they retain it for when they disembark? Guess what? Neither. One-shot weapons equipped by squads can no longer be used from firing deck rules. Yeah. It's a little sad. I was completely fine going the direction of the one-shot is expended through firing deck and the squad loses it, but I guess with the few cult players that exist in the tournament scene, maybe this dynamite rush tactic was too strong to begin with. I'll still try and make it work, but I'll miss the chance to blow my own truck up in one go. The Index Errata actually has some decent shifts in it. This is reflected in the updated index cards on the Warhammer community page, so be sure to check those out. But there are two index changes in particular I wanted to highlight. Number one, for all you Space Viking loyalists out there, you got a massive stats overhaul for many of your melee-focused units. Across-the-board improvements to the formerly underwhelming melee potential this team had, which was further pushed by the melee weakness that 10th seems to have in its rules. Hopefully, these shifts will move some of the local wolf players away from ranged heavy lists and put them back in the saddle of the up-close and personal approach. The second change isn't actually talked about in the errata. We have to take a trip over to the Drakari index list. In a surprising twist, they received a second detachment option. Surprising because this hasn't happened yet for the index teams. Also surprising because many of the other struggling teams didn't gain this benefit. Either way, if you play Drakari or were planning on picking them up, maybe take a look at this. What we have here is a massive shift in power potential, leaning more into transports and damage output with hit and fade possibility, gaining ignore cover for ranged weapons and lance for melee when disembarking from transport. Stratagems that reflect the transport-focused concepts with both further buffs to units or even solid defensive options to the vehicles themselves. All of this tied in with the army rule adjustment we already went over, increasing empowered melee armor pen by 1. Real Space Raiders for a lot of people sounded like a disappointment for a detachment, but some people were making it work. Now I think we'll see a bit more Raider-centric teams with this new detachment. If you're a speculator on what units to buy before they never go back in stock again, I highly suggest trying to get your hands on a Tantalus or 2, or 3. Budget depending. This change to the Drakari index is both incredible and a little infuriating. I've seen it said that since this has occurred for them and none of the other struggling teams without a codex in sight on the horizon, this must mean that the Dark Eldar may end up being one of the last teams to be revealed. I don't know about that exactly. No insider trading info here, but I feel like this could also be read as a shift in how to beta test ideas. Even though the Dark Eldar aren't on the roadmap yet, this may be a way to speed up playtesting before the announcement, as many in the Warhammer 40k community seem to feel that Games Workshop's playtesting crew is probably a pretty limited size, which tends to cause issues when looking for truly abusable game mechanics. When comparing it to the realm of video games, balance testing in closed servers and betas tend to go to the masses to circumvent the need for extraneous rosters of playtesters. We, the grand nerd community, tend to be all too willing to help and provide feedback while paying for the privilege in those situations. This could be some of that. All in all, a lot to go over with the first balance shift of the year 2024 for Warhammer 40k. We didn't touch on everything, and as stated, there will be links in the description below to get your hands on all this info. I just wanted to go over much of the bigger things I noticed as I spent a full day not putting together a Kill Team Felgor overview video. Kind of sad that the big teams I played didn't get much love this time around, but sometimes it happens. If you noticed anything huge for factions you play, let us know in the comments below. You could also maybe join our community Discord and continue the conversation there. Either way, I have to attend to some goat people. So, likes for the like god and subscribes for the subscribe throne. I am Kimmerix, and I'll see you in the next one.